rainstorm goes well, so I cut it out, put back in wet. Put the water outside, get it wet, cut it out.
But that's normal. But after that, I think they always think.
Nasty out there. Sure enough. Yeah, wait. Rain.
I'll use the little bell today, Gabriel.
Put it in.
The big one's so sad.
That wasn't
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I know, it's such a sad little bell, that one there.
How's the bigger one?
Well, you
Oh,
know,
we do.
usually I do, but today I decided to do the little one.
Do something, a little second show.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. We are gathered to continue our discussion on the call process today. Before we jump into all of that, anything to pray about this morning from you guys? Things to include in prayers today. All right. Why don't we just start with the prayer then? Gracious God, our Heavenly Father, we thank you again for being present with us on this special day to remember the events of Palm Sunday and what you sent Jesus to come and to do. That is why we exist, Lord, to proclaim the wonders and the works of your Son. Help us to do that today always. Bless us as we continue our discussion on the process of the call, and bless us today as we join as a congregation to extend a couple of calls, and may your will be done in all of that. Bless us today and always, dear Lord. Amen. All right, so picking up here, how does the Wells call process work? How advantageous that we're kind of hitting this today, because we're going to have a call meeting just a few short hours. One thing I think that's an important distinction to make is recognizing the difference between calling versus hiring, right? And when we talk about calling someone into the Wisconsin Synod, it's not a hiring process, right? We've talked a little bit about how other church bodies might do it, but we are doing it a little bit differently here. So we don't do interviews with candidates. Don't have them come in and sit down with me or something like that. That's different. That's one way. It's very different from hiring. We don't have audition sermons. Why not? Why not have your new pastor audition a sermon or two for you before you say, we want this one, we don't want this one? What do you think on that, Gary?
Well, you're not leaving it in God's hand as a call.
Okay, you're not leaving it in God's hands? Okay. Why not have him give an audition sermon or two? What do you think? What might it be a risk, another risk?
Not a popularity.
It's not a popularity contest. What do you mean by that?
It's not whether you like. I mean, you're just not voting for them because you like them.
Okay.
They're for a reason. It's not personality.
All right. Okay. So there's different things. I mean, preaching is important. We're not saying it's not important, right? But what we are saying is the style or the mannerisms or things like that aren't as important in that. What aren't we concerned about, at least as we extend calls, which in a different situation you might be concerned about and you might want them to audition a sermon or two?
Maybe they're not trained enough to do something where we know ours is trained.
Okay, so we've got this kind of training background that we talked about, right? 8 years of schooling before you're able to receive a call into the pastoral ministry. And not only does that training summon the capability of how to preach, and the work that goes involved with that, but what else is involved in all that training? Maybe it's just so obvious that it's hardly.
Trained in God's word, so you know where they're what they're gonna be preaching on.
Okay, right, yeah, so there's a doctrinal content. What did you say, Rob?
They're already trained in how to do something.
Right, yeah, exactly. So we trust, part of the training system, right? You got one whole year where you're a vicar. We had Vicar Waterstrat here a couple different times. So, and he loves getting out and preaching. When I was in charge of putting the Lenten rotation together, and we had kind of a funny number of preachers and a funny number of churches, so it didn't all work out evenly. Like Pastor Cuck from Divine Peace is actually in the rotation, but it worked out that he wasn't going to pass through our congregation as a part of rotating through the various congregations, because we had kind of more preachers than places to preach. So my first one, I think I had Pastor Cuck preaching a little bit more often, and Pastor Schwartz called and said, "Hey, James, Vicar really likes preaching. He wants to preach a lot. So can you put him more in the rotation and get him out there? Because he really wants to get more experience doing that." I said, "Oh, that's awesome to hear. Yes, we will do that. We will do that." So that gives him that exposure and that just opportunity to stand in front of people and practice. So I think, I'm not going to remember this exactly, but I think they want the vicars preaching between 30 and 40 sermons in that year. So I think it's 52 weeks in a year plus special Sundays. So a little bit better than half the time you're preaching. So you start off slow and you kind of work your way into it. So that by the time you're done, you've got kind of your style developed, you've got your mannerisms started to develop. I remember when I was a vicar, Pastor Wilhorn, my bishop, he was a wanderer, so he said, "James, try that. Try wandering." And I would stand in one spot and just preach from one spot. He's like, "Okay, try it again. It's just planted there, right? Planted there." He's like, "All right, fine. If you're just going to stand in one spot, then at least stand behind the pulpit. That's fine."
How did you feel when you were vicaring, like, the different churches and stuff?
Well, you're preaching mainly at your home congregation.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, mainly there, yeah. But like during the early summer months, you might take a sermon on the road and cover a couple services at area congregations to give the guys a break or something like that, which is nice and great. So, in fact, you write your first sermon your first year at the seminary. So you have 2 sermons written and approved by the seminary your first year. The first one's just trash. You're just preaching it before your classmates. I mean, I'm teasing. It's a little tongue-in-cheek. Of course it's not trash. We're preaching God's Word. But I would never preach that sermon again in my life. Because it's the first one you preach. You're making all the mistakes. You're doing weird things. It's just awkward. It's just, I'm sure there's guys out there who loved their first sermon and would preach it to the day they died. But that one got locked away in the archives, never to see the light of day again. Any rate, but you do wind up with these 2 sermons at the end of your first year. And then that summer, they encourage you, go out and preach. Go out on the road. You're going back to your home congregation over the summer or to a different area to spend the summer. And just, offer your services to the other congregations. And they may pay you for the preaching and covering services. That's a way to earn some money over the summer as well. And it gets you preaching in front of people. It gets you that exposure. So you're working on this all the way through. But by the end of your vicar year, you're pretty well confident for the most part in the process of putting a sermon together and in presenting God's Word before the people. So yeah, by the time you graduate, you're ready to rock. Let's say Faith did this, right? All right, Pastor Wilcox, we are auditioning you to be our new pastor. We're going to fly you out for a couple weeks. Come and preach us a couple sermons, and we'll decide if we want to extend a call to you or not. What might that make me do as a preacher?
You'll go for the wild effect, especially if you want other discuss.
Okay, yeah. If I'm looking to get out, right? That might put a temptation in the way, right? To say like, okay, I gotta preach for effect. I gotta preach to impress. And so maybe I won't tackle the tough topic of the day, right? And things like that. Now, certainly I don't know the group and things like that, so you're still always going to preach, I suppose, a little bit more of a generic kind of sermon anyway, the first couple, because you just don't know the people yet. All right, so that's why I think we don't do audition sermons. Kind of from the congregational perspective, it's not like Carl was saying, it's not a popularity contest, and from the preacher perspective, it's not, I'm trying to get a job here, right? So I'm going to preach something that's acceptable to everybody. So we just leave preaching as preaching. No extensive resume. Of course, you notice in the calling sheets, you get a little bit of bio info. You get a little bit of skills and abilities. They allow you to kind of put in a little bio thing. You can kind of talk about your philosophy of ministry and just kind of let people know kind of where you think your gifts and abilities lie, what gets you excited about ministry, that kind of a thing. So that can be helpful, but no like all this day, like you know how a resume is, right? You went to school, you did this, you fellowshipped here, you did this, you had experience here, did this, all these programs or projects that you ran successfully, all this stuff, right? You don't put that, it doesn't go in. It doesn't go in. But there is trust that the Lord is working through the district president's judgment that any person on the list is qualified for this particular call. So that's a beautiful thing, right? You get this list of people, all right, these people are all qualified. If we called any one of them, they would be able to do the work that we've asked them to do. So there's trust. And there's also trust in the Lord that He's at work guiding the process, including the called person's decision. So there's trust in that too, right? That the Lord is working through that. All right. Let's talk about this one, because this is usually a source of debate when we pass out the call sheets. Let's talk about pros and cons of providing more information on a call sheet. What do you think on that? More information, pros and cons.
I think it's good that they say what they prefer, certain direction and on the English or that direction.
Okay. That helps. That can be helpful.
Helps,
Yeah.
But they can all do it, I'm sure, whatever, but one thing that they prefer.
I would assume that most people say, if they kind of have a subject area that they prefer, it's couched more in terms of, I'm really excited to be an English teacher, right, Bonnie? Really excited to be an English teacher. But at the same time, they recognize, like, hey, the Lord's calling me to teach, right? And so I'm gonna teach in whatever area that the Lord has called me, and I'm qualified to teach in, right? You do get, like, you graduate with an emphasis in this or that thing, so there's that knowledge, and that can be helpful too. But yeah, if you've been teaching for 10, 15 years, and you're like, man, science really gets me excited as a teacher. I love helping kids learn how the world works and things like that. That helps the congregation kind of work their way through that process. Yeah?
Well, I think especially since a lot of positions aren't like a single thing when you're, it's, principal and
Sure.
this, or it's this and coach, it's this and, so putting a little bit more information can help you find somebody that maybe can do the combination of things better.
Yeah.
Especially with positions that aren't quite as clear cut as they might be somewhere else.
Good, yeah, so having enough information for the thing that we're calling for, but not an overwhelming amount that it just becomes a lot to sort through. Mel, you had your hand up, I saw.
I don't know if a lot of people know or realize that when the congregation requests a call list, it gets scrutinized by the district president. And the district president pretty much, due to his experience and everything and knowledge of all the pastors and everything in the congregations, that he pretty much knows what the congregation needs, and he's in our interest to be the representative to select individuals that would fit whatever purpose that we were calling for.
Yeah, and that's that trust factor, right? That we know that he's helping to find people that, you know, and he's relying on us, right, to give him accurate information and things like that. Now,
I wish they were more consistent across each worker's info. Some have their strengths listed, some don't. Some state their preference for urban or suburban environment, some don't.
yeah, so anybody that's got a call form, synod people looking at you, go make sure your bios are up to date. Because that's on you. That's on you. You got to go in and do that. So that's just me tongue in cheek there, because I got to do that too. Yeah. So yeah, and you know, it's kind of up to the circuit pastor to kind of crack that whip. It's up to the principals to kind of crack that whip a little and make sure those bio things get updated. They do ask you to do it every year, but you know, well, they always ask in the fall, right? They ask in the fall, which is like the worst time for teachers. Like, oh, sure, let me time out here from this, you know, 36 hours a day kind of feel of getting my classroom ready and sit down and think about all this stuff. So it's a little tricky. So yes, yeah, same level of concern I think that other churches share too. So just to continue to encourage and get those up to date. All right, let's look at the next slide here quick. As far as this stuff knows, you kind of know this stuff already. Newly called worker, 2 to 4 weeks to make a decision. Not sure how accurate these stats are current, but for pastoral vacancies, I guess this is kind of a historical average. 7 calls issued, I think 6, right, for you guys when you were calling? Yeah. So and then usually a pastoral vacancy, somewhere in the 6 to 12 month range. So there are currently 157 pastoral vacancies in the synod right now. 157. So the vacancy rate is very high. I don't have a lot of statistics on the teacher side of things. You know, those stats. It's a little harder to split those up because pastoral, you're either there or you're not. Teachers, you know, you can have one teacher kind of cover multiple subjects, and it can be a little bit more fluid. So, you know, it's hard to know like how many teaching vacancies do we have. Well, maybe you can combine grades or maybe not, right? So, or principal vacancies to that extent. It's a little bit easier to determine that number.
Is there a pastor's retirement rate?
Oh, hold on here. I got a couple of things at the same time.
How many pastors are finishing their education?
I think we have, did you say 37? 37 guys graduating this year.
About every year, or?
That fluctuates. It's been,
Next year's going to be smaller, and then there's a slightly larger class.
yeah. So it's been kind of in the 30 range. Yeah. I think I heard another one over here.
Oh, I just was wondering, some years there's a lot of pastors retiring. Is that a big number this year?
I think we're kind of hitting that plateau or peak and kind of declining. You know, that really started to ramp up 2006, 2007, 2008, where you were seeing just tons of retirements. Because, you know, guys were aging out. They were hitting retirement. All the boomers were aging out. You had classes back in the 80s that were 50, 60 guys graduating from the seminary. So that's a huge cohort of people that by the time they're finishing their careers are going to be kind of trickling out of ministry over the next 4 or 5 years. So I think we're kind of through some of those periods now. It'd be interesting to look and see, you know, what graduating class right now would be typically retiring. If everybody retired at, say, 62 or 63, what graduating from the graduating class from the seminary would that be roughly, right? So you can kind of know roughly how big a pool you had, assuming all those guys stayed in ministry, which isn't true. You know, people pass away, people do different careers.
One thing that's coming out more and more is the changing demographics. Fewer births, fewer people looking at the college experience, deciding not to, how it's affecting upper level schools.
Yeah.
This very same thing could affect the ministry.
And it is and does, yeah. Yeah, it is and does, yeah. So, you know, let's talk to our teenagers about considering ministry. You know, let's talk to them about that. For our young men, you know, we've got pastor-teacher side of things. They can go either way, right? I think it's just one of the things to think about, too, is, you know, 18, 19 years old, you're not quite sure what you always want to do in life. But for those, you know, just think about the kids you know, right? Whether they're your own kids or just the teens that you know here at Faith or in other churches. You know, you got your actors, you got your athletes, you got your musicians. MLC has programs for all of those people, and you can go and you can flourish in those programs and enjoy that college experience. You know, you don't know, right, how the Holy Spirit is going to guide that person, using their friends, using their college professors and the people there to maybe flip that switch in their head and say, okay, yeah, I can consider ministry, right? Sometimes it just takes that, okay, I see my peers, they're succeeding at this, maybe I could too. You know what got me over the hump of college was what I was really nervous about the languages. I was very concerned about it. That's tough work, learning another language. Never felt that I was like super good at it in high school. Had to take the Latin remedial course freshman year, and I'll never forget. That was my very first class on my very first day of my very first college day, year. Sitting down, Professor Wendland, and he stands in front of us, and he's kind of a wild-looking guy, and he'd say, this is what he said, "Some of you are here because you were lazy last year, and you have to take this class again. Others of you are here because you did not do well on your Latin placement test, and you probably have a chip on your shoulder and thought you did better. And others of you are here because you didn't take enough Latin in high school. And none of us are happy to be here, including me. So let's get through this together." And I was sitting there going, what have I gotten myself into? But it turned out to be a fun class, actually. You joined together in all of this. But I remember getting to the end of that class, I'm like, what is MLC like? This is what all the classes are going to be like. But what got me over that language hump was to realize, like, I looked at a whole sea of other pastors, right? All these hundreds of other pastors, and I said to myself, they all were able to do this. They were all able to do this. They had people around them that helped them. Surely the same can be true for me too. So with that attitude, you just kind of applied yourself to the work, and it's true. God gets you through, and the language side of things is everybody's got a little bit of gifts and abilities in that area, right? Some are better at it, some aren't as good at it. My grade average for languages was a C by the time I was a sophomore at MLC. By the time I graduated, I had gotten it up to an A-. So I had to fight languages all the way through. I remember my advisor, senior year, saying, "You really had a tough road. You had to work really hard to go from a C average up to an A average in your languages." And it was a tough road. But I just remember you did the languages your freshman year, Greek 1, Greek 2, and then junior year you translate the Gospel of John.
Oh, wow.
The Gospel of John, the whole Gospel. And it's like when you do this after 2 years of fighting Greek, just hating all of the grammar and the rules and everything, and you get to John's version of Greek, and you go, "This is so easy. Why didn't we have this from the beginning? You're just reading it off the page like it's English. Like, oh, the light turned on. It was such a neat moment, right? So all those things just help. I think those are things you encourage kids with, right? You encourage them to know, like, this can be okay.
Did you know anyone that it was just too overwhelming? They decided that?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, that's part of the process, right? Is recognizing, like, this isn't going to work for me, right? So, and whether it was the workload or whether it was the responsibility of being, on your own without mom and dad telling you what to do every moment of your life, those things, as they do, they work their way out. And that's why you have good college advisors that, take you aside and encourage you and help you kind of chart through all of that. Yep.
Does Evergreen still offer Latin?
Does Evergreen still offer Latin? Do you know anybody?
No, but it's not required anymore.
So that's a good point. Yeah, those requirements have changed. You can still do Latin track. You can still do German track. There's also Spanish track that you can do through college. So.
You could do an online Latin course.
And you can always do that too.
Academy
Yeah.
offers that too.
Yeah. So I was a Latin guy myself, so it was just helpful, I think, as you go through that, because the wisdom of having Latin in high school is Latin and Greek share a lot of the same grammar. So the terminology and the structure and just the mentality of the language is very similar. So when you hit Greek, it's like, oh, okay, I remember this from Latin. This is how the Greeks do it. And it just kind of helps piece those two things together. So, but yeah, that's a debate for the language departments, always. All right. So just an encouragement, right? Just find those kiddos. Let's encourage them to consider ministry. We've got options at MLC for them, a good college experience. And we'll see, to your question, Todd, we'll see where things take us, right? We want to open more churches, right? We want to open more missions as a synod body. So we need more pastors. Even maybe that means there's some consolidation with other churches, as churches either merge or, kind of go into one another or something like that. That's going to change kind of the face of ministry as well. So, and that allows churches to be more flexible too. So all of those things are definitely part of what we're trying to keep tabs on. All right, let's move along here. All right, let's just quick through. We've talked about these kind of concepts, and you guys have experienced this before. Challenges and blessings of a vacancy. What's the challenge? Well, it's obvious, right? You guys know this.
Listening to Bill every week.
That's when we started coming here.
Cool. Yeah. And they're still here. So hey, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. So actually, that's kind of a blessing of a vacancy, isn't it? Where your lay leaders have to kind of step up and say, okay, we got to keep this ship afloat. We got to keep doing the work. What is the day-to-day ministry going to require of us? So jump in, go do it. That's awesome. Yeah. And that's been a blessing as we continue on here. Obviously, those kinds of things. What else might a vacancy give a congregation an opportunity to do?
Patience.
Okay, patience. Got it, patience, yeah.
It lets us know what we need.
What we need.
Right. It shows us, do we need this, do we need that? And our vacancy did tell us some things.
So right, you've got, these are the gifts and abilities God has given to us in our lay people, and the people in the ministry here, those volunteers, and what isn't there that maybe a called worker could help fill. Yeah.
That's kind of what I was going to say.
I had to beat Bill.
To take a look at what your ministry is and where you want it to go.
Yeah. So that can be a blessing, right? It can be, very much so, a blessing.
And evaluating options. One of the things we talked about during the vacancy was merging with another church.
Sure, right, yeah. What's that look like? Could that be a possibility, right? Yeah, and it does kind of force you kind of into this flexible mindset, like, okay, how are we going to move ministry forward? How could we do this, right? What are some things that are out there that maybe we've never considered before, but we would because we're in this situation?
It also tells us what we don't need.
Yes.
It puts it out there saying, some people, you get that idea of, well, we've had this pastor for 20 years, we've had this pastor for 20 years. We want someone who's going to be here for 20 years again,
Sure.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So do you want a young one, you want an older one, you want this, you want that,
So all that is just great because you're finding different things to talk about that really get to this whole point, right? The Lord of the church will provide. You must always be confident of that. A couple good passages here, right? All things work together for the good of those who love Him. All things, right? All things in the church, all things in the world. Oh, Naomi.
I think it also, a vacancy helps us appreciate the next one.
Oh, sure.
After you've been waiting for so long and all of a sudden they're here and let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah,
So,
yeah, totally.
That's exciting.
Yeah. Last two here, our times are in His hands, and pray for workers, Jesus says, right? The fields are ripe for harvest. There's not enough workers. There never are. So pray to the Lord of the harvest to provide workers for His harvest field. Always, always, always. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the decision process here. So, a person receives a call, right? A person receives a call. Now they hold two calls, right? Or actually, in St. Paul's case, the guy they call holds three calls because he got two on the same day. They try to avoid that. But it does happen from time to time, especially, as you kind of ramp up before the call service at the seminary. You got a lot of calling activity that kind of builds up right before then. So you're holding two or more calls. How do you decide? Which one do I take, right? And that's a decision-making process. So a lot of discussion with your congregational leaders, right? Bring up a council, call your president, call key leaders within the congregation. Sometimes you might do like a little open forum kind of a thing. Like if I got a call, I might stand up in front and say, well, guys, what do you think? Stay or go? What are your thoughts? Right? And of course everybody says, stay, please stay. The whole crowd says go, then you know. Okay, guys, do you want to sign the letter for me, or should I?
So when they pull the coin out to flip it, you can't get worried?
Make sure it's a dual-headed coin. Right. But you might do that. In the past, I'd say like back in the 50s and in the 40s, even the 60s, this was a much more cards to the chest kind of thing. The pastor would get a call. He wouldn't even necessarily announce it to the congregation. He might tell the church leadership. He might just tell them on the day he made his decision. Hey, I just want to let you know I received a call, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and I've decided to take it or I've decided to stay, And so it's all right there, kind of just... So the process has changed a little bit over the years. And that's okay, right? I think getting input from trusted people, people that aren't afraid to say, right? Hey, I think, you've probably used your gifts as best as possible here. Time to move on, right? In a kind and loving way, obviously. Not in a get rid of you way, but... a way to help them see that. Or just to ask those questions, like, well, how do you think your gifts are being used here? How do you think of that? Obviously, talk with the wife, talk with the family, and lots of prayer. Lots of prayer. All right, a couple quick questions just for you guys to wrestle with here. If a call is from God, right, we're saying these are divine calls, why does a called worker have a choice? If this is from God, if so-and-so church from such and such a place calls me and says, we've called you to be our new pastor. If that's from God, why do I have a choice?
Because he still has the one he has.
Because you still have the one you have, right? And yes, and then that plays into it, free will as well. There's, the legitimacy of your current call isn't taken away because you received another call, right? So it's important to remember that, right? Yes.
Is this calling process is unique to the Wells? Because, like the Catholic Church, the diocese makes a lot of decisions, and I think the Methodists, like their bishops or whatever, make decisions.
Okay. Yeah, I can't speak super authoritatively to this. I would suspect that Missouri Synod is probably very similar to how we go about the call process.
They do a little bit more of the interview kind of thing.
Do they? Okay.
Because my friends in Dallas, they have this really big church, and then they look at their membership, and it's kind of like, you just can't send a call to anybody. kind of.
Interesting. Okay.
And you have to look at the membership if there's a lot of well-to-do, higher echelon people, like
yes.
scientists or researchers
Sure,
or
sure.
something like that.
Who has the cigar box?
Yeah.
Um,
So at least that's what it seemed like when they were talking about calling a pastor.
Yeah, I can't, like I said, I don't know if anybody else has more experience. I think, we've talked a little bit about other church bodies here about the interview process and going about it more as a kind of a hiring, viewing it, a little bit more from that lens of a hiring process. So I don't know if anybody's got different experience. Yeah.
When you started talking about this, I texted my daughter and asked her how theirs was going.
Because they're down in Tennessee, Arkansas, sorry.
It's a Presbyterian church. They
Okay.
go through all kinds of things.
And they have like a committee in their
And a committee,
congregation,
and
right?
then they have a meet and greet, and today they had the sermon that he preaches, and after the sermon, they all vote.
Okay.
The whole congregation.
Pressure's on.
But anyway, I just asked her, she said, we're in the meeting right now. They have very formal procedures. We just voted. He accepted a good faith offer where if we vote to call him, he accepts.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Different process. Yeah.
I think, in Missouri, don't they just call their pastors, not their teachers, and their teachers are hired, or is that false?
That's a good question.
I think that has to do with the break in mission and ministry. They did not look at teachers as ministers of the gospel back in the 60s.
Yes, that is true.
I don't know if it's still true today, but I believe that is the case.
What's interesting about that is they've had a few cases go to the Supreme Court on ministers of the gospel.
Yeah.
So, and have prevailed on the free speech grounds that they can indeed fire somebody due to lifestyle choices or speech violations because they're a religious organization, and as ministers of the gospel, they fall under that religious freedom exemption and free speech.
My sister-in-law taught in Missouri Synod, and she had a call.
She had a call, yeah.
So I don't know if it's across the synod, but
She's saying like where
it could be by congregation. I'm not positive, but I know she held a call.
Sure. Yeah, and it could be, again, I'm just sort of just thinking out loud more than anything. Whereas they see this as auxiliary to the ministry of the pastor. So it's really the pastor kind of delegating some of his authority out to these. So it's still a call, but more like through his ministry kind of a thing. So, yeah. So I think, yes, to answer your question, I think it's fairly unique in Christendom how we kind of do this. Just based on our own personal experiences here and what we see in similar church bodies. What would be interesting would be to go into Germany to the Lutheran Free Church in Germany, whom we are in fellowship with, and see how do they do their call process. Is it similar to ours? So.
My nephew and his wife were ministers in the Presbyterian.
Okay.
And they ended up getting a call, I guess he each had one, but they ended up in the same city. She had a church on that side of town.
Okay.
He had a church on this side of town.
All right, that works.
Well, it was very strange. I don't know how long they did that. But,
Okay, sure.
They were both Presbyterian. They had to be interviewed and all that.
Sure. Again, thinking about this decision process here, you've got this work to do, right? Please do provide input. And you have a responsibility to do that. Like, if you don't think somebody should take a call them and tell them that. That's your work to do. If they don't hear that from you, they're probably not going to hear it from anybody else, right? They might hear it from a fellow called worker. But if you have a feeling about this, do share that. And, you know, it doesn't have to be long and drawn out. You know, it's like, hey, I heard you had a call. Please don't take it. Or please take it. One of the two, right? That is a responsibility we share together. Because it's sort of like, if you remember in school and you had a big question about a math problem because you didn't understand it, but you were afraid to raise your hand and ask a question because you didn't want to look stupid in front of all your friends, right? But that one brave student, you were so thankful because they asked the same question you had and you benefited from it. It's the same kind of thing, right? Don't wait for your fellow Faith Lutheran member to speak up, right? You be the one that takes that and says, hey, I should say something. A quick email, a text, a phone call, in line at church or somewhere in fellowship. Hey, you know, just praying for you. Even just that, right? We're just praying for you. You know, that means a world difference. So yes, please do that. Sometimes I wonder if the hesitation is like, okay, I don't want to say the wrong thing and sway them the other way. You know, oh no, don't worry about that. That's the Holy Spirit's working through all of this process. Speak how you feel. Right.
One of the things, we've had a lot of calls and everything.
Yes.
One of the nice things is that I've heard feedback from call workers is, what do you add to our ministry? So just saying, yeah, we don't want you to go, like, of course we don't want them to go. We like everybody, we enjoy you, but what is it that you're adding to our ministry that we appreciate you being here for?
Yeah, good, yeah.
So if you can just think of something like that, like,
That's helpful.
That's helpful.
Yeah, it gives them something to noodle on. Give them something to think about. Maybe I hadn't noticed that about myself, that kind of thing. Yeah, good. Pray for the called worker, see or she struggles. Indeed. Encourage, okay, we just talked a little bit about that, right? I think you mentioned a great point. You know, what you're adding to the ministry here, what are you contributing? That's helpful. You know, just knowing that you take the time to say something, you know, is helpful, I think, as a called worker. And ask some questions about the kinds of things that the worker may be considering, right? What's it going to be like here and there? Or what kind of ministry team are you working with? Or what's the congregation like? Or what's, you know, things like that. Good questions. All right, slide 26 here. All right, so there's three types of considerations here as a called worker is working through this. And they're kind of divided into two camps. Or three different things. There's factors that must not influence the deliberation and the decision. There's factors that may play some part in that deliberation, but they don't determine the decision. And there's central questions that must determine the decision. So what must not influence the deliberation and decision? Can you think of anything that must not influence it?
The weather.
The weather! Right. The weather. That certainly didn't influence Josh's decision.
Football team.
Sorry, Josh, you knew this was coming. Right? Okay, yeah, oh man, they're going to give me a parsonage and it's got 2 acres of land. Awesome, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
The housing,
Right.
anything that's material, like, I would even think the money, like, I don't know that money housing.
Yeah.
We have like a set thing or whatever, but
Yes.
I know there's other things that factor into that maybe. So that
You know, and all of that is, it's, you know, every congregation is going to put their package together. The Synod does have Synod code. There's a payment scale that you're to pick from, and it varies depending on experience. There's, I think, 6 or 7, maybe more, 10 columns and they say, okay, pastors should be in these columns, which are a little bit higher because of the responsibility, teachers a little bit lower, depending on their experience level, and then years of service. So you go this way down the matrix, and then this way, and you kind of find the base salary, and then they have, it's just a whole calculator, you just go on and you fill it all out. Benefits and housing and all that's calculated in there. So that has gone a long way since the old days. And that was even, I'm saying, for when I started in ministry, that was kind of, they're trying to be more uniform across the synod and just asking congregations to really work towards a living wage for your called workers. Your called workers should be, in the same range as what other people are making in your area. And so they have a base salary, plus cost of living adjustment, plus a housing, and that gets you to roughly where, well, yeah, don't read into that and compare it to your thing, because the base salary is pretty low. And then you add in the COLA and you add in the housing, and that gets you to kind of a typical salary in this area. So it's not like you might take Boeing's base salary, cost of living and housing. Well, that's going to be very different than the Synod's base salary, cost of living and housing. So those two things don't quite equate together. So anyway, so that's trying to be more uniform. And sometimes, the district president can put a little pressure on a congregation that doesn't want to pay Synod code and just ask them, okay, you want me to provide a call list, and you say you're not going to provide Synod code. So what are you doing in your congregation to get there? They're not saying I won't give you a call list, but they want to know what's the process for getting there, because we want to make sure our called workers are taken care of financially. And that takes this off the table a little bit, right? If I know as a called worker that generally speaking, any congregation that calls me is going to be working at Synod code, that kind of takes the financial thing off the table quite a bit as far as the temptation goes. You see what I'm getting at? So I know we're going to take care of it. Yep. All right. Something that may play some part in the deliberation, family considerations, health considerations. Like if I've got an illness and I'm being treated at a hospital in the area, that might be
Age?
Could be, yeah, could be age, yeah, could be. It depends. Pastor Nitz from Messiah and Lacey, when he was there, he's maybe 10 years out or so from retirement. And what do? They call him to be a missionary to Vietnam, right? Okay, right? So sometimes age matters, sometimes it doesn't. It just kind of depends.
That's where I said the name.
Yep. Financial support may play some, but only if it's not enough to provide for the needs of your family, right? So if they're below Synod code and it's not going to provide enough, that may influence this a little bit. Doesn't make or break it for sure, because God's going to take care of you. But there may be some conversation you have. Like they may say, yeah, we know we're a little bit below Synod code, but we got a 5-year plan. This is how we're working on it, and you can review that and say, oh, okay, that makes sense. I see where you're coming from on that. But there are two central questions that have to determine this. Where will the talents God has given me do the most good for God's kingdom? That's one to wrestle with. And where will my faults and limitations do the least harm? Right? And that's the blessing of the deliberation process, is it brings these things up to the surface that maybe haven't been discussed before or recently. So that's why a call can be a good thing, right? Even if the intention going into it, I'll just tip my hand here a little bit. I'm eligible here in the next 2 months. My intention is not to take a call. But if the Lord does call me, okay, we got some time to think this through, time to ask these questions and work through that process together right? And that's good, right? Just that whole process of just asking these two questions and getting reinvigorated for ministry and reconnected. Any of our called workers here who have deliberated recently know that's a blessing. All right. What role does the spouse or family play in all of this?
Does there have to be a spouse or family?
Doesn't have to, yeah. There are a lot of single called workers out there, for sure. Yep. A lot of them are married, though, so it's a good question to ask.
I have I've been thinking about, what happens when both husband and wife are called workers, and one gets a call and one doesn't?
Right.
Especially if the wife gets a call and the husband doesn't. How does that interact with the idea of family headship and stuff like that? And what if the husband's a pastor versus the wife being a teacher?
Sure, yeah.
How does that hierarchy,
Yeah,
is there a
right.
hierarchy? You got a wife here.
So, in that sheet that you fill out, you put all that information in there.
Okay.
So, I was not going to get a call outside of the area where we were living.
Okay.
So I could be called within that area to any of the congregations, and in fact, I did get a call when we were there. And, but it was never going to be, and I chose the radius, how far I would be willing to go.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
you
so that
can put
helps.
that in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they recognize that going in. I was just thinking Pastor Lang at Light of Life just had a call deliberation out back to Wisconsin, but his wife had just accepted a call to teach at Holy Trinity. And so when I saw that, I was like, boy, that's a sticky one, because she just accepted this call. I can't see Dan coming to her and saying, sorry, honey, you gotta resign before you even set foot in the door, right? Though I think in consultation with your wife and working through that process, it might have been one of those. You could potentially theoretically see that as a situation where it's like, yeah, this is such a compelling call, or you're deliberating these two questions here, and you're really coming out strongly on, like, I'm going to take this call. It theoretically could happen. Practically speaking, in practice, probably not. And that's a fairly, I don't know if it's unusual, but that's definitely not typical, right? Because Sarah Lang has definitely given notification, like, yeah, I'm willing to serve in the area here. District president knows that, so when Holy Trinity goes to put their call list together, they ask to have her name on it. He puts them on there, knowing that she was willing to serve in that area. And then Dan gets a call.
Oh, my goodness.
Just how that works. All right. How should a called worker regard the call in which he or she serves, right? This is good. Just a good reminder. I mean, as a called worker, a good reminder to me and for you guys to just kind of know what sits in the background of our heads as we serve, right? This is not my call, right? This is God's call. This is the church's call, right? We aren't the bosses, right? We work at your request and in service to you. This is not my right, but my privilege. It's nothing I deserve, but it's all grace all the time. And you don't have to work in ministry too long to realize it's nothing I deserve. Because like that last question, right? Where are my problems, right? The things that I struggle with, where are those going to do the least harm, right? You see that all the time in ministry where okay, this lack of an ability here is, I'm bumping up against it once again, right? So it keeps you very humble to realize this is nothing I deserve, but I get to do it. Not a job or a career, but a calling from God. Not 9 to 5, but as needed, right? And that's so true. Right? We're not punching in, we're not punching out. Yeah, okay, do we need time off? Yes, of course, just like anybody else does. And you try to set some parameters for that. But one of you calls me up at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're going to talk to your pastor. Hopefully on the phone, as long as I hear it ringing. Please leave a message. I will call you back, I promise. Yeah, there's an expectation there, right? That ministry is being done. And there's that lesson, we mentioned that already. Not Lord and Master, but a servant. All right. Just kind of as we wrap this up here a little bit, we probably won't be able to finish all of this here. Let's see here. Why don't we just flip to the last slide here. So let me pop down to the end here. I think that kind of summarizes a lot of these excellent points here. For you guys, right? What's our takeaways here? Your called workers are gifts of God who serve because God has called them. to do that, and we recognize that. For you to be involved in congregational ministry, and I'm looking across the faces here, and you are. And so continue to do that. Continue to be involved because it's a beautiful partnership, lay people, called workers working together, right? The danger, is there's always going to be a little tension there because, a lot of you have your household duties and your careers and your jobs that you do day in, day out. So there's always going to be that little tension of availability there. But to be involved, but not to just rely on your called worker to do all of the work, right? There's plenty of work that we get to do together. And as called workers, not to take all that work on ourselves, right? Remember that no called worker is perfect. Who knew, right? Who knew? Yeah, we understand that. We understand that. But at the same time, we do tend to put our called workers on that pedestal a little bit. And to a certain extent, rightly so, right? We should be examples of humility and patience and kindness and gentleness and hospitality, all those good things, right? But when a called worker makes a mistake, it's okay to call them on the carpet and say, hey, that could have gone better, Pastor. Or you hurt my feelings. It's okay. And by the way, if I ever do that to you, please come and tell me. I will apologize, right? And if I have hurt your feelings, I am apologizing now, right? Please come and talk with me. That is so important. Provide encouragement and thanks for service. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, Okay, October is Pastor Appreciation Month. All right, now you know. All right, good. MPH wants to sell you all kinds of stuff in October for Pastor Appreciation Month. It is totally fine. Whatever you want to do. But it is important, right? I keep a book of just different things people have sent me over the years because that's a reminder to me that you guys encourage me. And so if I'm down in the dumps of ministry, I can look at that and go, hold on, James, you're still serving God's people. They love you. God loves you. It will be okay. We all have those moments too. Right. If you have a problem, talk to the worker, not to others, right? Duh, right? But it's so easy to get that little gossip thing. I think if the Wells has a problem, like a typical problem, it's gossiping. That is our cardinal sin in the Wells. So don't gossip, right? Don't gossip about other called workers. Don't gossip about each other, obviously. Come and talk to the worker. We truly want to get it sorted out. We truly do, right? We truly do. And it's important, right? Provide for their physical needs. The worker is worthy of his wages. I remember sharing this once with the treasurer, not here at the previous congregation, and he was just giving me the hardest time. Not seriously, he just was a huge tease. So we were going back and forth on should pastors get a paycheck. But that's it. 1 Timothy 5:18. Obviously, right? And that can vary. I remember hearing stories from Depression days, and how did they provide? Right? They provided a chicken. A chicken showed up on the door, plucked and ready to go, right? Yeah, bacon bread. So, please don't deliver plucked chicken to our door. That's not a request. Any of you chicken farmers, I know where you are. Although eggs are great. I bet you Mrs. Wilcox can handle that. Where's Dennis Bishop? This happened, right? Yeah. Do you want to tell the story you told me the other day, or should we leave it as just part of the folklore of Washington State?
We'll leave it as part of the folklore.
Okay, we'll leave it as part of the folklore. All right. Anyway, so that's fine. Ask him privately. Ask him privately.
All right. I was given a pickup load of live ducks. So me and my brother, we talked to the pastor, so we were behind the church, killing these live ducks and dipping them in hot water, we were told, to help get the feathers off. Well, it was cold, the water would stay hot. We had ducks running around with their heads off. It looked like something satanic was going on behind the church. And well, we ended up freezing these ducks, and me and the principal, we would pass them back and forth on each other's doorsteps. You'd ring the doorbell, and you'd look out, and there'd be a frozen duck. I don't think we ever ate them.
That's pretty innocent. That's pretty innocent. Yeah. All right, thanks for sharing.
Elijah
right, so what a beautiful thing we get to serve together in God's church. And I thank you for all your prayers that you have offered. I know our fellow called workers here all would say the same. Thank you for your prayers. And we just continue to serve together and work through that call process here as we're working on things here together. So, with that in mind, let's pray. Gracious God, thank you for providing so many called workers to your church body. Continue to bless us together as called workers and as lay people, striving to proclaim the gospel, all we say and do. Bless us all, dear Lord. Amen. All right, thanks guys. See you later, everyone.
We found it, but we'll bring it